Hello, welcome to revision tips for CIPS Level 4, Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 1, Scope and Influence of Procurement and Supply, and it's Learning Outcome 4, which is to understand and analyse the need for compliance with the requirements when undertaking procurement in different sectors. So we're going to look at the different economic and industrial sectors, the impacts of the procurement in public, private and not-for-profit or third sector supply chain roles. So let's start with the economic classifications at the top. This is how an organisation is funded, what its objectives are and how wealthy it aims to be. And you've got the private sector. These organisations aim to make a profit. Public sector. These ones aim to provide essential services to the people. And the third sector, or not-for-profit, organisations that aim to do good. At the bottom, you've got the industrial classifications, which is the type of organisations in terms of their activity. Now, primary sector organisations extract oil or raw materials. There might be farmers, whereas the secondary organisations or secondary sector are manufacturing or construction type organisations because they take the components from the primary sector to build and construct something or manufacture a product. The final industrial classification is known as the tertiary sector. These are organisations like consultancy organisations or retailers, and essentially they offer services. They don't make anything and they don't grow anything. So primary would grow, extract, secondary make, and the tertiary sector provides services. So let's just go through them in a little bit of detail. So we'll start with the public sector first. Public sector are owned by the government and they're controlled by the government as well. They're funded through taxation. We pay things like council tax, pay as you earn, corporation tax. There's lots of taxes that get paid. They go into a pot and it funds the essential services, which is the overall purpose and objective of a public sector body. These essential services are integrated and integral to the well-being and lifestyle of people around the country. In terms of their industrial sector, they're a tertiary organisation because they're providing services such as caring for citizens, providing and improving services, enhancing facilities, interacting with communities. Now, examples of the public sector and the tertiary classified organisations are those that provide education, medical treatment in some countries like health, the housing, social housing or affordable housing, as well as law enforcement, so policing. Now, as we know, they're funded by the citizens so that services need to be fit for purpose and the public needs to be satisfied. And there are lots of stakeholders, as you can see on this screen. Now, the budget available to the public sector have to be carefully managed. Often there's not enough money to supply the ideal service to meet the objectives. Now, the procurement within this sector faces a challenge of keeping facilities available to the public at an acceptable standard within an agreed budget. But they're also governed by regulations. So in most countries and regions around the world, there are specific regulations that apply to procurement within public sector. Regulations have common themes such as non-discrimination, the free movement of goods, equality of treatment of the organisations in their supply markets, and transparency. So good ethical practice is very important, and the regulations aim to prevent anything that breach this policy. But each country will have the guidelines that cover the procedures and processes that should be followed prior to awarding public contracts. The rules for awarding contracts above a certain value threshold, as well as the CSR policies that should be complied with to help the local community and the general environment. When the public sector is audited, compliance to these regulations will be assessed. An independent consultant might visit the public sector to review how the organisation is spending its money and whether it's meeting its objectives. The choice of suppliers should be evaluated, and the suppliers should be investigated to ensure they're performing to the required standard and meeting their contractual obligations. The audits in this sector are more rigorous than in the private sector to ensure that the public money is being spent in an efficient, ethical, and I suppose effective way. So do some research on the regulations that apply to procurement in your country. Now, in terms of the procurement procedures the public sector will follow, you've got more than four, but these are the main four that you will see being used. The open procedure, the first one, is the fastest and simplest route to awarding a contract, but it allows no opportunity for negotiation, and it's open to everybody. You advertise it essentially on a portal, and anybody that sees that advert can apply to bid for that contract. So if you've got a really large market, it's not a good idea to go down the open route because you'll be spending quite a lot of time evaluating the responses. You can't pick and choose, 10 out of the 100 that you receive. You have to evaluate all of them. So it's really important that you use that approach wisely. I have to say though, the UK government regard the open procedure as the default procedure for their, for their procurements, but you would use a restricted process where there's potentially a very large number of bidders in the market. So what the restricted process does that the open one doesn't is it allows for a two-staged approach. It still gets advertised and stage one is open to anybody, but you have to go through a pre-qualification phase in order to shortlist that down to a manageable number. Now, competitive dialogue should be considered for high complex outcome-based contracts. This is the procedure that does allow you to dialogue with the provider on the solution to the problem that you're trying to procure a solution for. Sometimes the market knows a better way to deliver it. And the last one I want to tell you about is competitive procedure with negotiation, sometimes known as CPN. And that can be really useful when the needs of the organisation cannot be met without some sort of adaptation. Like, for example, it's really difficult to buy an off-the-shelf solution. There are no two things that are exactly the same. So, essentially, it'll allow you to design or innovate the solution prior to awarding the contract. And it can only be used under special circumstances. You can't just say, I'm going to negotiate on everything. It needs to be related to the nature, complexity of the legal or financial makeup of the contract, or because of the risks that you're attaching to the supplier. Procurement policy notes are regulations prepared and maintained by the Crown Commercial Service in the UK, and they're aimed at helping the public sector to procure goods and services in a fair and transparent manner, in line with public sector requirements. They provide guidance on public sector practices on a wide range of subjects, including data, visibility, and the threshold levels. The threshold levels change every 2 years. Now, the public sector uses 3 criteria to assess the value for money of government spending. And it's about the optimal use of resources to achieve an intended outcome. So this concept is known as the 3 E's. So you can see the 3 E's in the middle of the screen: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Economy is minimising the cost of resources used. It's, in other words, about spending less or buying the same for less. Efficiency is the relationship between the output from goods or services and the resources used to produce them. So it's about spending well, or I like to say it's about saving time, not money. Economy is about the money, efficiency is about the time. And effectiveness is the relationship between the intended and the actual results of public spending. So what was the outcome? How effective were you? Did you spend wisely? Let's go on to the private sector now. So these private sector organisations are owned and funded by individuals or enterprises of some description. Purpose is to make a profit. Now, they're funded through a combination of revenue, debt, and investment. What I mean by that is revenue is money coming into the business for everything you sell. Debt is borrowing money to invest and grow. Or you can sell shares and get investment from, I don't know, venture capitalists or something like that. The objectives do vary from one organisation to another, but it's going to be about profit. It's going to be about increasing your market share, or be the number one site for, I don't know, internet searches, whatever it might be. The sectors can be either primary, secondary, or tertiary. So, as we learned a little while ago, the primary sector organisations are involved in extracting raw materials of some description, whether that be farming, agriculture, extracting oils and minerals from the ground, metals. The secondary one make things, so they're either manufacturers or constructors. And the tertiary offer services to the customer. Now, in terms of the way they're structured or formed, on the left-hand side, you've got unincorporated businesses. On the right, you've got incorporated. So let's start with the unincorporated first. The smallest of these is a sole trader. And what we mean by unincorporated is that the business is not a separate legal entity. The business is about the individual. So if you start a business as your own self, providing a service, I don't know, let's say you decide to become a plumber. The business is about you, as a person, and a sole trader essentially is just one person that can do that. They've got the benefits of saying when they work, how much they charge, they can keep all of the profits. But as a business, we're looking at you as an individual, and if you wasn't available, nobody could replace you. Now, it's natural to want to grow, I guess, and one of the easy ways to do that and still remain that unincorporated status is to form a partnership where two or more people come together. Everything else essentially remains the same in terms of the fact that it's not a separate legal entity, but sometimes partners have limited liability. And some partners can be equity partners or salaried partners. So an equity partner is one that just receives shares but probably doesn't work in the business, whereas a salaried partner would. Then on the right hand side, the incorporated companies are registered at Companies House. This is where you see a complete difference because the business is now a separate legal entity. So the two types you can get is a private limited company or a public limited company, but don't be confused by the fact that it's got public in the title. It's not a public sector organisation. The only difference between a private limited company, which normally has the word limited at the end, and a PLC, which is the public limited company, is that the public limited company will float on the stock exchange, which means it's more available and easy to sell. But the benefits, of course, of becoming incorporated is you've created that separate legal entity, which means that the business is not about the owners anymore. It's got its own legal status. So if it gets into debt or anything like that, the owners wouldn't be liable for the debt. Now, in the private sector, there's a big drive towards the corporate social responsibility factors, and it's really about a business understanding the impact they have on the world around them. And the CSR policy is a business approach that helps a company to be socially accountable. So it will look at its stakeholders and the public. But at the heart of it is sustainability. And by practicing this CSR, companies can be conscious of the kind of impact they're having on the society around them, including the economic, social, and environmental factors. So you've got the people, the planet, and the profit on here. To engage in CSR means that the normal course of business, a company is operating in ways that enhance society and the environment instead of just contributing negatively towards them. And the attitudes towards this vary from one company to another, but also from one industry to another. Now, some companies pay lip service to CSR, and what we mean by that is that you agree with something, but you don't actually do anything to support it. And they conclude that it's only worth supporting CSR as long as it increases profits and doesn't harm the profits, or that a company strategy will include, I suppose, satisfying the stakeholders to secure funding for the future. So the companies separate essentially their business principles from their moral principles. Now, these companies may be failing to recognise the benefits of CSR because they're too busy pretending that it's important and doing nothing about it, when they should be trying to communicate and understand their stakeholders so they can move on with their relationships. And that can only be achieved by listening to a logical argument and learning from the marketplace. Where this fails, some governments have forced CSR onto companies by introducing laws regarding moral behaviour of businesses. But actually, if you do it well, you can increase your profits, you can satisfy your shareholders. You know, people want to invest in businesses that are going to be around in the long term. Employees want to work for companies that are doing something good. So it does have a lot of benefits. Now, regulations on the private sector are definitely not as strict or numerous as the ones imposed by the public sector, but they still should be promoting good practice within procurement and the supply chain. Many of the regulations of the private sector are set internally and results where, I suppose, organisations may differ, but essentially these internal regulations are likely to be based around the CIPS Code of Conduct, a code of ethics, and policies around anti-bribery, sustainability, and environmental awareness. And also you've got things like transparency and accountability. So on here you can see some of the regulations and standards that you might expect an organisation to adhere to. So you've got the International Labour Organization, ISO, outlines standards for achieving things like quality, environment and good practice. You know, you've got the Consumer Rights Act, which used to be called the Sale of Goods Act. It's all about making sure that the goods and services provided to customers are fit for purpose. There's general data protection, health and safety, as well as the transport driving regulations, making sure that drivers don't drive for more than a certain number of hours per day. Another thing that's important to the private sector is their brand, and brands are interestingly powerful concoctions of the marketplace that create value for organisations and for the individuals. And a brand consists of all the features that distinguish the goods and services from one seller to another, in terms of things like their name, their terms, design, signs and symbols, as well as their customer touchpoints. Now together, all elements of the brand work as a physiological trigger or a stimulus that causes an association to another thought one has about this brand. So if you take McDonald's as an example, you know, a child that can't even speak will be able to recognize those golden arches as they're driving towards it. And that's the power of the brand. As soon as they see that image, that picture, that sign, they're instantly wanting to eat that product. So brand can be really powerful. And I suppose businesses want to ensure that they achieve something called brand loyalty. Now, brands can create perceptions. So let's talk about the attributes first. This creates specific product features. So if you take a Mercedes, it suggests expensive, well-built, well-engineered and durable vehicles. What about the benefits? This translates into functional and emotional benefits. And again, if we take Mercedes as an example, it suggests prestige, luxury, wealth, reliability and some form of self-esteem. Values is the company values and operational principle. And again, the Mercedes brand invokes company values around excellence and high performance, but also power. Culture are the elements of the company and brand. And again, Mercedes represents German precision, discipline, efficiency and quality. Personality. A strong brand often projects a distinctive personality. The Mercedes brand personality combines luxury and efficiency as well as precision and prestige. And then finally, the user's perception may suggest the types of consumers who buy these products. So Mercedes drivers might be perceived and classified differently than, for example, the driver of a Ford. And the final sector is the not-for-profit or the third sector, sometimes referred to as TSOs. They're operated by corporations, trusts, or associations, but charities have founders, not owners. They're funded by donations or voluntary contributions, and any surplus that's made are used to support their goals, which is why they're referred to as not-for-profit. That's not to say they don't make a surplus, but it's how they spend it. So the purpose is to support and promote either a social, economic, or cultural objective. And I just say that it's about creating social wealth or to do some good. So the objectives will depend on the nature of a third sector organisation. If you take a charity, for example, Greenpeace aims to raise awareness of a cause, attract donations and funding, and ensure continuity of support and engage stakeholders. Now, buying groups and cooperatives aim to offer their members cost savings on a wide variety of products by obtaining competitive prices that they can pass on to their members in the form of trade discounts. Now, in terms of their sector, industrial sector, they're likely to be tertiary sectors because they provide a supportive role for their chosen cause. So the examples are charities, the cooperatives, mutuals, and housing associations, as well as trade unions and professional associations like CIPS. Now, if we take registered charities, funds by donations from the public, but can also be, I guess, from businesses as well that sometimes want to be associated with a charity, but even grants are so, be given by the government. And because of that, their conduct is regularly, I suppose it's regulated closely. So they're regulated by an independent body in some countries that aims to reduce any wrongdoing or any foul play. And it aims to ensure that good conduct happens in all registered charities. So the independent bodies ensure that the registered charities act correctly. They guide them by giving them good practice, and they reprimand them if they don't follow the regulations. But generally, having to provide a summary of their annual activities, including their accounts, to show what work has been done, how they spent their money, and failure to provide this could result in a charity being removed from the register. Now, ideally, procurement professionals in charities will be MCIPS accredited to ensure that money is spent effectively and best value for money is achieved. Third sector organisations may not have official procurement regulations that they are required to work to, but good practice should be exercised at all times. Larger organisations will have their own procurement procedures and processes that must be followed. So if you look at the screen, we can see the similarities, but also the differences between the procurement activities in the public and the private sector. Documentation is key to transparency in third sector organisations. As long as everything is written down and accepted without any agreement to do something in return, there won't be a problem. And the CIPS Code of Conduct can be followed as a guide to aid and ensure buyers appear transparent and show accountability in their actions. So similar to the private sector in that they do try to get value for money, they do conduct ethical procurement, promote sustainability, benchmark and carry out supply chain management. The differences from the private sector is that the suppliers might offer something or nothing or reduce prices because they want to help the cause. And gifts and hospitality is a complete no-no in most organisations. If you take the private sector though, it's allowed, but they need to document it and verify to ensure that donors are not looking to influence the decision making. So private sector organisations are owned by individuals. Their businesses are driven by profit. This profit from the private sector benefits the owners, the shareholders and the investments. They're funded and financed by private money, either from shareholders or from bank loans. Public sector are owned by the government, providing goods and services to benefit the community. They're run by the government and they operate with money raised from taxes. Third sectors are owned and run on a voluntary basis by trustees. They're not run by the need to make a profit, but they need to help the community. And they operate with money from donations and gifts. Any surplus is reinvested in an opportunity. Thanks for watching.